Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf contains two separate discussions, two separate sugyas. The first is a continuation of a previous discussion. We had a list of rules as to how we paskin, what the halacha is, when there are machloksin between four Tanaim. So we had seen that Rabbi Yochanan gave a list of rules as follows. He said that between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon we don't know, but if either of them argue with Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and if any of those three argue with Rabbi Yosi, the halacha is like Rabbi Yosi. Those are Rabbi Yochanan's rules, and the Gemara said that Rav Misharshi said it's not true. He argued on this entire list of rules that Rabbi Yochanan never said that, or that it's not true at all. Now, the Gemara has already brought two potential sources for Rav Misharshi. How does he know that these rules aren't true? The Gemara rejected them both. Now, we're going to have four more potential sources, so we're going to quote four separate sugyas in halacha, and each of them you'll have a machlokes between some of these Tanaim, and it will indicate that these rules are not correct. And the Gemara will say that none of these could be the source for Rav Misharshi. We'll reject them all, and we're going to end up revising what we quoted Rav Misharshi as the saying. And then the Gemara will go to the halachos of an object belonging to a guy, whether it gets its own tchum or not when Shabbos begins. So first of all, let's go to the list of cases over here. So again, we saw that list of rules, and now we're trying to find sources that the list of rules of psak are not correct. So the Gemara brings its first psak, which is a Mishnah, discussing somebody who owns a house in a chutzner, in a courtyard, together with others, but that person goes away for Shabbos, and he didn't make an Erev Chatzeres. The question is, normally you have to have an Erev Chatzeres in order for other people to be able to carry in the yard, because if you own the yard, that messes up other people's rights. The question is, you've gone away for Shabbos. So does that mean that you still have rights in the yard, or do we say that no, it's like you're out of it, you're not irrelevant to this discussion for this Shabbos, and even though you didn't make an Erev Chatzeres, the others can still carry there. So the opinions are as follows. You have a number of opinions here. First of all, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says whether it's a Jew or a guy who went away and owns a part of the chutzner, you can't carry there. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not a problem if he's away. It's not a problem. It's not considered like he owns it. He's out of this discussion. Rabbi Yosi says it depends if it's a guy or a Jew. A guy could come back on Shabbos, and therefore he doesn't consider himself to be away permanently, long term. He's not Mesiach Das. A Jew, however, knows once he's away for Shabbos, he's not coming back, and therefore he's the entire house and its yard is out of sight, out of mind. Rabbi Shimon says even a guy, even if he just went to stay by his daughter right down the block in the same city, still he's considered to be out of it, and he doesn't mess up using the chutzner, even though he didn't make an Erev Chatzeres. Those are the four opinions. Now, on that, we have Rav Chama bar Guri said, in the name of Rav, the halacha is like Rav Shimon. Halacha is like Rav Shimon, that's against the rules. You have Rabbi Yosi arguing on him, and you have Rabbi Yehuda arguing on him, and both of them are supposed to have the halacha like them against Rabbi Shimon. So Gemara says it's a proof that the rules are wrong. So Gemara says, what's the proof? Here, we've learned what the halacha is. We were told with the halachas, the rules are for paskening in a case where we don't know what the halacha is. Here, if we already have a psak, so then the rules were never said. The rules were only said where we do not have any idea. We just have to follow rules. It's a fallback option. So therefore, this doesn't prove anything about that. Okay, the Gemara goes to its next proof. This is a question of how you make an Erev Tchumen. We had said that an Erev Tchumen means that you set up your residence somewhere. There are two ways to set up your residence somewhere. You could either go there and be there for the beginning of Shabbos, or you could send food, 2 meals there, and then that's considered your permanent residence. Now, the Gemara, we have Mishnayos all over that discuss sending food. The question is, this idea of actually going there, does that work for everybody or not? So the Gemara says it's a machlokes if it works for somebody who could afford food. For a poor person who can't afford food, to set up food somewhere as an Erev, that for sure works. The question is, does it work for a rich man who could afford it or not? So Rabbi Meir says no. It was only made, this idea of going somewhere and having that be your shvisa, your makam shvisa, the center of your tchum for Shabbos. That was only said for a poor person who can't afford food. The right way to do this with food, and therefore if you could afford food, then you have to. Rabbi Yehuda says, what do you mean? That's not why it was said. Really, the right way to do this is to actually go there. The whole idea of sending food was a special leniency. We said, listen, if you could afford to send food, so you don't have to go travel all the way over there just to set up Bitchum and then come back on Shabbos. You know what you could do? Send somebody with some food, make a messenger, let him go, bring some food, put it down over there, and then you have a solution. But it's not, by no means was it ever meant to be the main solution. So again, here we have a Machas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. The Halacha is supposed to be like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara says the following thing: Rav Chia, the son of Rav Ashi, was teaching Chia, the son of Rav, and he told him this case, and he said that the halacha is that a rich man is allowed to make an heir of himself also. And Rav was listening, and Rav said, tell him also that the halacha is like Rav Yehuda, which is what he was saying, but he was saying emphasize that the halacha is like Rav Yehuda. So the Gemara says, why do you have to emphasize that? If the rules are the rules, then the halacha is always like Rav Yehuda against Rabbi Meir. So why does he have to spell that out? Obviously, Rav doesn't hold of these rules. So the Gemara says, you're right, Rav doesn't hold of these rules. Rav Yochanan holds of the rules. Rav Yochanan said the rules. And we know that if a machlokes is between Rav and Rav Yochanan, we go like Rav Yochanan. So therefore, as far as we're concerned, the rules still stand. So the Gemara rejects that, and Gemara says, okay, let's go to our third for this daf. It's the fifth overall. Our third potential source that the rules are wrong for Rav Masharshia, and this is a Brisa. This is a Mishnah, which is later going to quote a Brisa as well on the subject, but this is a Mishnah discussing a woman who lost her husband getting remarried. So the Mishnah says that she's not allowed to remarry until 3 months after the passing of her husband. What's the reason? So it depends who. If you're talking about a woman whose husband passed away without children, that means she falls to Yibum to his brother. So she has to either do Yibum, which means the brother marries her. It's forbidden for a man to marry his brother's wife unless it's this situation of Yibum, which means that his brother had died without children. The other option is that he could do Chalitza. Chalitza is a procedure by which he removes his shoe, spits on the ground, and says, this is what you do to somebody who doesn't want to rebuild his brother's home, and then she's free to marry whoever she wants. There's no longer a Yibum connection. Now, neither of these two things can be done within 3 months of the death of the husband. Even if you wait to actually marry him or somebody else until afterwards, you cannot do Yibum or Chalitza within 3 months. What's the reason? So Yibum you for sure can't do because if she's pregnant, then she has a child, and her husband has a child, and then she's not supposed to fall to Yibum at all. So she can't marry the brother. It's forbidden. So she definitely can't marry the brother within 3 months. After 3 months, we could tell that she's not pregnant. If there's no sign or indication of a baby bulge by that point, then we know that she's not pregnant. However, why can't she do Chalitza? Let her do Chalitza within 3 months and marry somebody else after 3 months. So the Gemara says he can't, because if it turns out that she was pregnant, then the Chalitza that she did was no good. And she's still technically permitted to marry Kohanim. So if she now has a child who was born, and she didn't fall to Yibum, she may want to go marry a Kohen. But the problem is she already had a Chalitza that was an invalid Chalitza, and people may not be aware that it was an invalid Chalitza. And you may have people who will think that this is a woman who had Chalitza, and now she's marrying Kohanim. How's she allowed to do that? They wouldn't know that this Chalitza was no good. And therefore they'll come to learn the halacha that a woman who had Chalitza is allowed to marry a Kohen, which is not true, she's not. So therefore we have to make sure before Yibum and Chalitza that 3 months have passed. Then this opinion, which is unnamed in this Mishnah, continues. And it says, and no woman is allowed to marry anybody within 3 months of the death of her husband, because we're concerned that she may be pregnant, and if she goes and marries somebody else, we won't know who the father is. If we don't know who that father is, that could create all kinds of halachic problems. And this applies even if she couldn't possibly be pregnant. We make a general rule, we do not differentiate in order to avoid mistakes. And it doesn't matter whether she was married to the first husband or she was just engaged. She was an arusa, which is more than our modern engagements. It's an actual contract to marry, but they were forbidden to become pregnant during that time period. Still, she's not allowed to marry anyone else. She's not even allowed to get engaged to anyone else, even though she won't become pregnant until 3 months later, because she won't actually have the conclusion of the marriage until 3 months afterwards. She's not allowed to become an arusa to anyone else. Doesn't matter if she's a besula, she's a virgin or not. It doesn't matter if she was widowed from before or if she was divorced. None of these things make a difference. This opinion, which is again unnamed, says in all situations she's not allowed to marry anyone until after 3 months. Now Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says in a situation where there's no pregnancy, there's definitely no possibility of confusion as to who the father is. We allow her to get remarried. What would that be? That if she was only engaged to the first husband, not married, so she couldn't be pregnant from him, or even if she was married to the first husband, but she's allowed to get engaged to her second husband and not actually marry him until after 3 months. Since an arusa, an engaged woman, cannot become pregnant if it was either engaged to the first or engaged to the second, it's okay because you cannot have confusion as to who the father is. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda notes that there is one area where people could potentially get into trouble and become pregnant even while they're engaged. That's the region called Yehuda. Over there, the engaged couple were often misyached together, they were often alone together, and therefore over there we are concerned that she may actually become pregnant even while she's engaged, and therefore over there we wouldn't allow it. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, no, all women are allowed to become engaged. There's no concern to become engaged. You're not going to get pregnant while you're engaged. Now, they get married till after 3 months, but they're allowed to engage, even if they were potentially pregnant already. Now, the only exception to that is an almana. That's a woman whose husband passed away. She's in avel, she's in mourning. She shouldn't do something joyous like getting engaged within the immediate time after the passing of her husband. Okay, so these are the opinions in the Mishnah. And now, let's try to figure out who is the Tanakama. The first opinion that we said had a general rule, we don't allow anything. Who is that? The Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar once didn't make it to the Beis Medrash, and he was walking and he met Ravasi, who was standing there, and he said, what did they say in the Beis Medrash today? And he said over this, and he said, and Rabbi Yochanan said, halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Gemara says, halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. That means that the Tanakama, the one who said everything's forbidden, must have been a single individual. Because if it was a multitude of people, if it was a rabbim, then he couldn't paskin like Rabbi Yossi against the rabbim, especially since the rabbim is more logical. Their position here makes a lot of sense. And the Gemara says, yes, you're correct. It is an individual, and I'll show you who it is from a brisa. The brisa quotes a very similar machlokes, and clearly shows that opinion that says we do not allow anything under any circumstances is Rabbi Meir's opinion. The brisa is talking about the rule that women cannot get remarried within 3 months of the death of their first husband, and the brisa talks about all kinds of women that cannot possibly be pregnant under any circumstances. Do we still have a general rule or not? And Rabbi Meir says we have a general rule, even though they can't be pregnant, still we do not allow them to get pregnant, we do not allow them to get remarried within 3 months, and Rabbi Yossi says we do. So we see that Rabbi Meir is the one who says there's a general rule, and therefore Rabbi Meir is the opinion here. In our Mishnah that said the general rule that it doesn't make a difference who they are. So it's Rabbi Meir against Rabbi Yossi. Now, just before we go further with the proof, let's just read the brisa here and what is involved. What are the cases here where she can't be pregnant? So one of them is where she spent the last 3 months in her father's house. She wasn't home with her husband, or they were angry at each other and therefore they weren't together, or he was old or sick and he couldn't possibly get her pregnant, or if she was old or sick, so she couldn't become pregnant, or if she was an islandess, which is a medical condition where she never develops, or she's a child, she's too young to become pregnant, or she's taking birth control, which means she cannot become pregnant, or her husband's in jail, or she actually has a miscarriage after the death of her husband. She's definitely not pregnant then. Still, in all these cases, she cannot get married within 3 months of the death of her husband. She has to wait 3 months. And that's what Rabbi Meir says, and Rabbi Yossi argues. He says she can get engaged and married. So the Gemara says, okay, so we see that the machlokes is between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. And we saw that Ravasi quoted Rabbi Yochanan, who said that halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Now that fits the rules. The question is, why do you have to say that? We have the rules already. You don't need to tell me that. Without that information, I would know it on my own because of the rules. Obviously, the rules aren't true, and this is Rabbi Yochanan here. This is not somebody else. This is Rabbi Yochanan who was the source of rules, and that would be Rabbi Mishashiyu's source for saying that these rules said in Rabbi Yochanan's name are not correct. So the Gemara rejects this as well. The Gemara says, no, there's a reason why Rabbi Yochanan would have to say it, even though it's in the rules. They'd have to say it because this is a case where Rabbi Meir is making a gzeira. He's saying, listen, don't get into sticky situations, avoid it, make a general rule that applies in all cases. On a Isser D'Rabbanan applies everywhere. And we have a rule that Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel. When Rabbi Meir says gzeiras, there he is correct. The halacha follows him. So Rabbi Yochanan is coming to say that that's not true. He's coming to argue on Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel's rules. So that would be why he wanted to emphasize here. Even though I said a general rule, you may think this is an exception because it's Rav Meir making Zeras. So now we say, no, not necessarily. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to its fourth and final attempted source for Rav Masharashiya's statement that these rules are not correct. And this is talking about buying from a guy during their holiday season. The halacha is in the beginning of Masechus Avodah Zarah, you're not supposed to do that because the guy will end up thanking his Avodah Zarah for it, and we do not want people to be thanking Avodah Zarahs for things. But there are exceptions. And there are exceptions to other halachas as well in order to be able to buy things from the goyim. The Brisa says as follows: you're allowed to go to a marketplace set up by the goyim on their holiday, and you're allowed to buy from them animals, servants, slaves, houses, fields, vineyards. All these things you're allowed to buy. Why? Because each of them is a special reason to buy them. You are bringing something into Kedusha. The animal becomes more kadosh and now has b'chor, and it also is not going to work on Shabbos. The avadim and the shvachas become Jewish. The homes, the fields, and the vineyards, it's part of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. You're actually settling the land of Israel by buying it from the guy. Therefore, we want you to do that, and we allow you to do it even though you have to do it at a time when they may come to thank their Avodah Zarah. We override that Isser D'Rabbanan. Not only that, but you're allowed to actually go to court with them and have the judges sign off on the paperwork, even though we don't usually do that, and the judges will be happy and go thank their Avodah Zarahs. Still, we allow you to do that in order for these reasons to happen. Now, it even goes further. It says you're allowed to go into Chutz La'aretz if you're a kohen in order to do these things. Generally, Midirabbanan, we assume that all of the regions outside Eretz Yisrael are tamei and filled with graves, and the kohen's not allowed to go there. But the Rabbanan repealed this Isser D'Rabbanan in order to allow you to buy these things for the reasons that we said. And then the Brisa said something funny. It says you're even allowed to go to a cemetery. Cemetery. How could a kohen go to a cemetery? That's an Isser D'Oraisa. You can't take off an Isser D'Oraisa. The says, I didn't mean a cemetery. I meant a base of pras, a field that had a grave in it that was plowed over. Midarai, you could assume that it's okay. And Midrabbanan, it's forbidden for a kohen to go there. That rule is repealed for him to be able to buy these objects. Now, another thing that repeals these rules is going to learn Torah. You need a Rebbe, the Rebbe that you can't find a Rebbe, or you have a Rebbe, but he's not necessarily one that you're able to learn from. He's not your style. And you need somebody who's more to the point and more direct and more brief. So then you're allowed to go to learn. Now the Gemara, the Brisa adds, was an incident that happened with someone named Yosef a Kohen, that he went to his Rebbe all the way to Tzidon in order to learn on the Torah. Okay? Now, this is Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to go if you have a Rebbe. You have a Rebbe in your area, you're not allowed to go to Chutz La'aretz if you are a Kohen to learn. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan said, the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. So again, the question, why does he have to say that? We know the rules. This must be a proof that the rules are not correct. There was no such rules ever said, and that's from Shashi's source. So Gemara says, no, again, this doesn't work, because this is a Brisa. Brisas often have mistakes in them. And therefore, maybe Rabbi Yochanan's rules really are said, but here, Rabbi Yochanan has to tell you the halacha anyway, because you may be afraid that the opinions are switched in the Brisa, and therefore you couldn't rely on it, that it's a mistake in the recording. And therefore we say, no, that it is correct in these other rules. So the Gemara says, fine, we have no source for Masharshia. It must be Rav Masharshia never said the rules are wrong. What Rav Masharshia actually said was that Rav doesn't hold of the rules that we saw earlier in a previous Machlokes about setting up an Eruv with your feet actually traveling there. So that's what Rav Masharshia said. Rav doesn't hold of these rules, but Rav Yochanan definitely did say them. Okay, the Gemara now goes back to the discussion about objects which get their own tchum. So we had seen a machlokes earlier between Rav Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanan. A hefker object which has no owner. Does it get a main residence? Does it get its own tchum? According to Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, it gets a tchum, and it's only allowed to be moved 2,000 amos in every direction. According to the Rabbanan, it doesn't have a tchum. Objects can't have a tchum. Only owners could have a tchum. So an ownerless object has no tchum, and anybody who picks it up, it gets that person's tchum automatically, and if he could walk 4,000 amos within his tchum, then this object can go 4,000 amos. It's not restricted to its own 2,000 amos tchum. So Gemara says, Shmuel, Yehuda says the name of Shmuel, says the following halacha. What about an object that belongs to a goy? So Shmuel says, an object which belongs to a goy has no tchum. And if it comes in possession of a Jew, then it picks up the Jew's tchum. And if the Jew can walk 4,000 amos to the end of his tchum, because he's on one end, then he can carry this object. It has no tchum at all. Now, Shmuel says it's halacha, but he doesn't say whose opinion it is. He doesn't say if it's Rabbanan or Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So the Gemara tries to work out which one it is. The Gemara is going to have a problem both ways. The Gemara will resolve it. The Gemara is going to bring that there are those who argue on Shmuel and what is the halacha. So, who is Shmuel saying his opinion like? Shmuel said that an object which belongs to a guy does not get any tchum. So the Gemara says it's certainly the Rabbanan certainly hold away, because if the Rabbanan hold that a hefker object has no tchum, an ownerless object has no tchum, certainly an object which belongs to a goy doesn't have a tchum, because it's less likely to have a tchum than a hefker object, because a goy doesn't have a Shabbos. A guy doesn't have a tchum, b'chal. The whole idea of tchum doesn't apply to a guy. He has no mitzvah of keeping Shabbos early. He has no makam shvisa. So an object which belongs to him is more likely to not have any tchum, because it's not just hanging out. It's his object. It should have his rules. So, as a matter of fact, the Gemara says Shmuel can't be saying this in the Rabbanim because it would be pashut, for sure. I wouldn't need anybody to tell me that. Shmuel must be saying it in the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says objects have a tchum, they get their own automatic tchum, it doesn't go by whoever picks it up. So it comes to tell me that's only objects that don't belong to anybody. If it belongs to a guy, then the objects keep their owner's halacha, and their owner is a guy, and the guy has no tchum, so the object has no tchum, and anybody who gets hold of it can bring it around his tchum as far as he wants. Now the Gemara has a problem, because we have a brisa that says that objects which belong to a guy do have a tchum. They do have a tchum. And if Shmuel was saying this halacha in Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, then he was saying that everybody holds that objects which belong to a guy don't have a tchum. So who is the author of this brisa be? It must be that Shmuel was saying this halacha in the Rabbanan. And we're back to our kasha that it's pasha. It must be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that objects which belong to a guy do have a tchum. Shmuel was saying it in the Rabbanan that they don't have a tchum. And then that's a problem, because it's pasha. For sure, if the Rabbanan hold that a hefka object has no tchum, an object which belongs to a guy does not have a tchum. Let's just see the brisa at length over here. The brisa says the following series of halachos: somebody who borrows a kli from a guy on Yom Tov, or he lends to a guy before Yom Tov and the guy returns it on Yom Tov. Either way, it began Shabbos in the guy's possession. It began Yom Tov in the guy's possession, and therefore it should have the guy's rules. Or hefka objects where somebody found a kli or a storehouse. All these things have a tchum of 2,000 amos in every direction. Now, if a guy brings fruits from you from outside the tchum, then those are objects which left their tchum, and therefore they're limited to 4 amos. So again, you see here that something which began Yom Tov in a guy's possession gets a tchum of 2,000 amos, and that has to be Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Nobody else could hold that way, and therefore Shmuel, when he says that such a thing is not true, is going to Rabbanan, and that is pashut, because Rabbanan said that on a hefker object, certainly on an object that belongs to a guy. So Gemara says, it's not pashut. It's not a pashut. You may think that a guy's objects are more likely to have a tchum, because you will get confused if we allow a guy's object to have no tchum. You'll get confused between a guy's object and a Jew's object. You view them both as objects which belong to somebody, you won't be able to tell the difference, and will end up with a mistaken halacha. You end up saying that a Jew's objects also have no tchum. That's for sure wrong, and therefore we have to make gzeira. That's what you may have thought. Comes Shmuel and says, no, the Rabbanan don't say that. You don't have to make the gzeira, and it's not a problem. A guy's object has no tchum. Then Gemara goes further and says, Rav Chia bar Avin quotes Rabbi Yochanan, who says, no, we do make the gzeira. And a guy's objects do have a tchum. They're limited to the tchum of the guy. So you have now a machlokes between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan if a guy's objects have a tchum or not. Gemara quotes a case over here where the guy brought sheep to a town called Mavrachta, and Rava said people from Mechuzah, that is a neighboring city that's within their tchum, are allowed to go to buy them. That means that Rava was saying that they have no tchum, like Shmuel. So Gemara asks, that Ravina asked Rava, what do you mean? How can you pass like Shmuel? Rabbi Yochanan says the other way, and Allah is like Rabbi Yochanan against Shmuel. So Rava changed his hayra, and Rava said that they're limited to within 4 amos, but the entire city that they are in counts as their 4 amos, and therefore everybody within the city is allowed to buy them and allowed to use them for the duration of the year.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.